r/AskReddit. People who have known murderers, serial killers, etc. How did you react when you found out? How did it affect your life afterwards? I knew a kid in Boy Scouts who moved to a different town and beat a homeless man to death when he was 17. I wasn't terribly surprised. I'd heard stories about him killing kittens when we were younger, and I suspected that his adopted father, our scoutmaster, was a molester. My sister's ex-boyfriend is in jail currently for killing his next girlfriend and putting her body into a cement-sealed barrel. It's so awful for that girl and her family, but all I could think is what a such evil revenge mission I would be on if it had happened to my sister. It still keeps me up at night. One day I was working on a family tree, and I'm quizzing my mom about different names and connections and stuff. Then out of nowhere she tosses out, and then there was old Aunt Tilly, who strangled a little boy in her living room. Stop the press. Say what? She explained that Tilly started hearing voices, and there was a little boy who used to always come by in the afternoon for cookies. One day he came in, and she strangled him to death, and was found wandering the streets, babbling to herself. She was in an insane asylum for 7 years, and was then released, and died shortly thereafter. Though I never knew this relative, I found a newspaper article about it, and was haunted by the image of the little boy, and wondered about how many generations of his family were affected by this horrible event. Oh, I had an Aunt Zilla who raised her illegitimate child in her attic for 12 years. We don't talk about Aunt Zilla often. Sort of off topic, but when Ted Bundy was in prison in Florida, I think, his favorite reporter to speak with was my cousin. She still has the Christmas card he sent her one year. They had a falling out while he was on death row, and I think he sent her death threats. Ted Bundy worked on a suicide hotline. His co-worker during the late, lone hours in the middle of the night was actually researching and talking about the murders to him during their shared shift as he was going about killing people during off-work hours. She says she never felt afraid, never suspected him. She has been a police officer and now writes true crime. It took her many years to accept that he was a serial killer capable of all that. She finally was able to write a book, The Stranger Beside Me. She says, oddly enough, he saved more lives on that suicide hotline than he ever took. That chilled her. Late to this, but I do have something to contribute. I knew James Holmes in college. He was 1 year ahead of me, but same major. I remember taking classes with him. He also did a bit of research in the Bavaria, and so did I, but in separate labs. So our paths crossed often. I remember him being super paranoid. I remember filling out health questionnaires/medical clearance forms for a final that required in vivo work and access to the Bavarian. He threw fit in our lab, telling our talk he wasn't going to fill it out. He finally did, but put a disclaimer on the bottom of it. It was bizarre. I think that it was around 08/09, I think he was already unraveling then. I remember when I found out about Aurora, I was working when my old college roommate texted me asking if I heard about the shooting in Colorado, followed shortly by her texting me who did it. My roommate remembered him clearly from a GE class we both took with him. I remember feeling scared for some reason when I put the name to a face. My teeth started chattering wildly. I was shocked. It still freaks me out to this day remembering working in labs and having class discussions with that guy. We were definitely not friends, but I probably saw him nearly every day for at least a couple years. I can still see him working across from me under a fume hood in my mind's eye anytime his name is brought up. This year a coworker sent me a news post of a murder. The news mentioned a guy with a name I didn't really recognize, but it said that he was 2 years older than me and graduated from the same college on the same major. I look up the name on Facebook, and I immediately recognize him. I had a couple of classes with him and he was the president of my major's student association. I didn't get involved much with these kind of things. He beat his girlfriend to death, stayed inside the house with the body for 3 days, and then killed himself with a plastic bag. It surprisingly affected me more than I expected since I barely even knew the guy. I felt sick the whole day. Didn't impact me much after, but it sucks. The poor girl was highly involved in non-profit organizations, and they looked like a fine couple. Strange world. When I was in the army, I knew a guy who used a joke about killing his wife all the time. No one ever thought he would. It was just a joke. He ended up working into our first sergeant's office, guy who was in charge of the lower enlisted. He told him he killed his wife. The first sergeant said, "Yeah, get the fuck out of my office." He replied, "I'm serious." MPs were sent to his home on base. Sure enough, they found his dead wife. I went to school with a popular guy on the pro athlete team, but always kept to himself. He seemed to only interact with others when he was playing with his teammates. But he wasn't awkwardly quiet or anything. He said hey/smiled at others. Cool content guy. But then, he was on the news for killing his GF's mom, and little sister, minor. It was a domestic violence situation until he decided to take things further, I guess. Police found him walking down the street with blood all over him. It just seems weird because you know this person, and it makes you wonder what made them react to that extent. In grade school I sat next to this guy named George. Super quiet kid, and occasionally I would go over his house after school. His mom would occasionally be our substitute teacher. Fast forward to when I am in college and go to pick up a New York Post in the morning. I see the headline, 3 strikes, she's out. Kid beats mom to death with baseball bat. And there was a photo of George and his mom. It was big news in New York for a brief period, and last I heard he was sent to jail. Fast forward a few years later, and I am working in Manhattan, and I literally bumped right into him on the subway platform. Apparently he got out after a few years. It was seriously the most awkward small talk I ever made with someone in my life. Edit. Found an old New York Times article. I'm a forensic psychologist and work at a state hospital on the unit for people found not guilty by reason of insanity. Many of the clients' index offenses are murder or attempted murder. Because of the circumstances of their crimes, they are usually in the paper with varying degrees of follow-up media attention. When new staff first transition to the unit, they are shocked at how generally stable most of the clients are. Some are indistinguishable from your friends and family, others are clearly mentally ill, but they seem more tragic than dangerous. When I was in high school, one of my friends murdered his family kind of out of nowhere. The day it happened, it started to get around to my friends that something went down at his house. This was before most people had cell phones, and texting wasn't a thing at all, so throughout the day, more and more people were contacted and headed over to the guy's, whose name is Andy, best friend's house. The first officers on scene got his name and his brother's name mixed up, and we were all told that his brother had snapped and shot their parents and then called the police and gave himself up with no struggle. So we all got together, mourned as a group or whatever, then got up and went to school the next day. Shortly into the first hour of classes, everyone who was a known friend of Andy's was pulled out of class and called into the office. Once we were all there, the principal told us that Andy was alive, and that he had actually been the one who committed the murders. Everyone was pretty shocked. This dude was a totally harmless stoner who never even really seemed to disagree with anyone, much less have violent tendencies. I personally went into my standard compartmentalization/disassociation mode and just dealt with it by going kind of numb to it. The funeral was really rough. They had an open casket viewing even though his parents were both shot in the face. Andy claims to have no memory of doing it, and what they've pieced together is that he for whatever reason went into his dad's gun locker, pulled out a rifle and shot his parents in their kitchen. It didn't look like there was any kind of struggle. His brother came up from their basement and he shot him at the top of the stairs. He then called the police and told the dispatcher that his parents were dead, and when she asked who killed them he said he had. He went outside and stood on the lawn waiting for the police to come. Once they got there, he went into a full-on panic asking about his brother. He had no idea that he'd shot him. He got 18 years for each murder, I think, and was sent to prison. I wrote to him here and there in the beginning, but his replies just felt really strange to me. I feel a little bit guilty now about fading out of his life, but it was honestly really hard to reconcile the person I was friends with the person I was writing to, the person who killed his family. He sounded very stiff and hollow in the replies. I guess that makes some sense. I keep up with the details now through a friend who still keeps in touch with him. He tried to escape a few years ago. The guy he was trying to escape with was killed in the process and his sentence was up to life. I check his profile on the Michigan Offenders search page sometimes, but it makes me pretty sad to see him. He's gone all white power, I'm sure to save his ass, which is bizarre considering how 100% anti-racism he was prior to all this. I don't know how it's affected me really, other than my senior year in high school was a little fucked up because of it. There was a weird thing where a lot of people who didn't know him or weren't friends with him got really into the whole mourning thing, and maybe they took advantage, but they went to this group therapy thing that the school administrators had going for a while. I had to have mandatory counseling, along with a few other friends, but I wasn't really into it and I had nothing to talk about. Not exactly the same as a serial killer, but it was all pretty fucked up. I'm 30 now, and whenever it comes up, which is rare, I feel very disconnected to it. Edit. I've mentioned his surviving brother in the comments. He had 2 brothers, the older one whom he killed and the oldest who wasn't living at home and was not killed. Thanks for listening and getting this far. I hope you all enjoyed, and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed.